Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre. Hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura Mathiasen. Oh, yes, and Richard, too. Each episode, we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond. Sometimes even from the beyond. You can find us online at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem.
And the slow erasure of beloved co-host continues. It's just really, it's tragic.
Not for anyone listening.
It's tragic for me.
Yeah. Well,
I like doing this. That's a one-man tragedy.
TBD.
Have you ever said tragedy
No.
by accident?
Never.
I do
I've
sometimes.
never mispronounced a word.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. We don't even edit these. There's no need. Everything's
No.
perfect the first time.
I've never misspoken, said a word incorrectly, or I've never used a word incorrectly.
You know who I feel bad for is people who are awkward. I mean, I can't even imagine what that's like.
What about those weirdos that can't even interact with humans out in the world?
Yeah.
I mean, am I right?
What even is an introvert?
Why social, awkward?
Gosh. I mean, I'm flitting about from luxury property to luxury property, shaking hands and socializing and doing all the things that social people do. And I'm just like, reading books? What? Alone?
I mean,
Stop.
I never got any complaints from all my stuffed animals that I lined up on my bed.
I was just going to say. Yeah.
They always were like, wow, you're really graceful.
All the creepy Victorian dolls that were my best friends.
Well, that's your life. I had all different manner of stuffed animals, and they would line up and listen to me be social.
They still do, actually. This is recent. Hey, everybody.
We're talking about franchises today.
I mean,
horror
I think that was
franchises.
obvious.
Exactly. I mean, everything we've spoken about thus far all leads back to franchises.
Yeah, today we're delving into horror franchises, but also like what is a franchise? It's a very popular buzzword today. It feels like
it's a popular buzzword. What are you talking about? It's everything.
You're absolutely right.
The only movies that exist anymore truly are franchises.
Yeah.
At least the money makers and the ones that are mostly inhabiting theaters.
And we're going to get into that.
Yeah.
The sort of murky, I don't know if morality is the right word, but ethos of a franchise. And you know, it's a double-edged sword, a franchise. But before we do that.
So I could tell you like a little bit about what a franchise is.
I think that's a good idea because.
Dummy.
First off, as a dummy, I would appreciate the definition, but I also, it's a little murky for me. Like I think it's up for debate, but I'd love to hear what you have to say.
So films that are considered franchises meet most of these criteria. They have at least 3 significant films, including sequels. It's a concept of building a brand that speaks to an audience and then scaling it as far as possible.
I mean, scaling it as far as possible is definitely going on these days. That's for sure.
That's it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was waiting for more. Well, I mean, so the thing with franchises for me is it's sort of like, you know, that old adage, I think it was a congressman who said this or at some point. I may not be able to define pornography, but I know it when I see it. It's like, I know a franchise when I see one, but I'm unsure of what is the exact point at it becomes a franchise, right? Because
3 significant films in the series.
But isn't that just a trilogy? Don't you need to go beyond a trilogy?
Well, I think if there's
franchise?
a plan to continue. So if you're interested, I think it comes from the
like the Godfather
investors.
It
all
isn't
comes
a franchise. I wouldn't call that a franchise.
Franchising is a financial term.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it comes all from the money. Investors know that a movie with brand recognition is more likely to succeed than a standalone film. So investors are more likely to invest in movies that possibly have franchise ability.
Yeah.
So that's where all the money's coming from. So
that's why I've always kind of hated the word when they talk about movie properties franchise, because it's so it just seems so, it's like it's an accounting word, you know. It's like, I don't know, we're trying to talk about creative properties and franchise. It's like I just opened up my own Subway.
Well, I mean, even smaller, like seemingly mom and pop convenience stores are franchised.
Sure.
And when you think about success, if you can franchise your business, that is a template for success.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because
I want to talk about the top grossing franchises and some of the biggest franchise
hit me with
out there, not horror.
Yeah, let's do it.
So some of the top franchises of all times, James Bond.
Yeah, that makes sense.
26 total films.
Woo.
Marvel Cinematic Universe.
I think I've seen all of them too.
MCU.
Yeah, that also makes
29
sense.
total films.
Definitely.
I think it's more like 30 right now.
I just started rewatching Loki, and it's so good.
Well, that's not a film, but
I know, but I'm just saying, it's so good.
And Pixar Disney Animations with 26 total films.
Pixar's considered a franchise?
Pixar Disney Animations is a franchise.
Interesting.
Correct.
Interesting.
So there are trilogies and like maybe micro franchises within that larger franchise.
So in that case,
like
the franchise is like, it's not necessarily a narratively connected franchise. It's strictly...
You're still thinking from the movie maker
I can't help
perspective.
it.
You have to think from the financial investment.
Listen,
franchise
I think
is
we
a
both
business
know
term.
The reason we have so many luxury properties isn't my business acumen. It's yours. I am the dreamer. I can't understand half of what you're saying.
Do you want to know some of the highest grossing franchises?
I do.
Okay. So the top 3 highest grossing franchises.
We're talking monies.
Marvel, MCU, Avatar, and Star Wars.
I am not going to lie. It wasn't until I saw the trailer for Avatar 2 that I finally believed that it was real. Because, I mean, when James Cameron announced that he was making, like, 4 more Avatar movies, I'm like, what? I just didn't think it was really happening.
Have the others been filmed yet?
He's filmed, I think, 3, the third one.
Up to 3.
Yes.
So he's filmed 2 others.
He's filmed 2 and 3. I believe he's in the post-production on 3. And he did talk recently about maybe another director filming either 4 and 5 because he kind of wants to do something else now. I mean, James Cameron he's so busy.
Well, speaking of James Cameron, it took me a really, really long time to find the highest grossing non-franchise film.
So the highest grossing standalone.
Correct.
I
no
think
sequel.
I think I know.
No, nothing after it. It's the highest grossing non-franchise film, and it's another James Cameron film. And my co-host is singing terribly. It's Titanic. But my Titanic won't go on. It's a standalone film.
This is dedicated to the survivors of the mighty Titanic. That's my Celine Dion.
Oh, I thought you were talking about that old lady.
Rose.
She was American.
Rose, I know. Listen, okay, I've seen Titanic, obviously. I've seen all of James Cameron's movies.
So that is that since then, everything has been a franchise of some kind.
I mean, good old Billy Zane.
So since this is a horror-themed podcast, do you want to talk about horror movie franchises?
Can I guess what the highest grossing horror movie franchise is? Because I kind of think I know what it might be.
Go for it.
Is it the Conjuring universe? Like the whole Annabelle, Conjuring, The Nun, La Llorona, everything, like all that stuff.
The Conjuring universe is it.
Boom!
$2.1 billion.
Holy shnikes. Good job, James Wan and Lee Winnell. I mean, talk about, like, legit. Remember when you and I saw The Conjuring when we left the theater and we were like, just so blown away and so excited? Not every movie has hit, but a lot of them have. I would say more of those movies are good than bad.
Absolutely. Definitely more good than bad, although we are going to talk about, our tops. I just want to give you a little bit of a comparison, though.
Sure.
With how much of a difference. So I said that Titanic was the non-franchise highest grossing.
Yeah. Made a load of money. I saw it when it came out. I was in high school.
It's not too far off from the Conjuring universe, though. So here's the thing. That's one insane. Movie.
Wow.
$2.2 billion.
Oh.
As compared to the Conjuring universe, which was $2.1 billion.
That is so crazy.
5 movies.
Yeah.
And then the highest grossing is still Avatar.
Yeah.
And that made, anyone want to guess?
I mean, all the money. It just made all of it. There's none left. That's why everything's so expensive now, is Avatar took all the money away.
$2.9 billion.
Oh. Not 3? Couldn't get to 3, huh, James? Jeez,
almost.
James.
It's $2,923,905,528.
Think of how many luxury properties you could get with that.
So it's nearly $3 billion.
Yeah.
Next, Avengers Endgame with 2.797.
Okay. Cool.
And then Titanic is in third.
Yeah.
So James Cameron, Avengers Endgame, James Cameron.
Well done, James Cameron. I mean, the guy who basically revolutionized CGI and special effects in movies with Terminator 2 and The Abyss. That seems right. He's made some good ones.
Absolutely.
So getting back to like what makes a franchise, like when a property becomes a franchise, I would argue it's when it expands beyond a trilogy. I think a trilogy is sort of the end point for a self-contained story because, you know, you've got The Godfather 1, 2, and 3, and it really, that's it. I don't know if I would consider The Godfather to be a franchise, although it did start with novels. Again, it's so tough to define. You know, a duology that's not a franchise, but what if there are novelizations or spin-off comic books or something like that, or an audio drama? Does that make it into a franchise? I think once it expands out into other media, you can certainly start to call it a franchise.
Sure.
But you're right. I'm thinking of it strictly from the narrative or the creative point of view, and it's really just the money thing.
It is. I mean, if you wanted to franchise your business, you complete franchise like business documentation.
So I was doing research trying to find what the like original franchise was, and I didn't come across anything, but I have my own opinion, and I would say it's the Universal Monsters franchise from the 1930s, which I think began with 1931's Dracula, directed by Todd Browning.
Yeah.
And the reason I call it a franchise is you've got Frankenstein, Dracula, The Wolfman, The Mummy. Then you've got sequels to those films. You've got Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein.
Yeah, the Universal Classic Monsters.
There were also crossovers.
Absolutely.
There were crossovers between the films. There were spin-offs. There were parodies of films, like Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman and stuff like that.
Well, from the Universal Classic Monsters came the Godzilla franchise.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, like in the 50s, Toho studios in Japan started making Godzilla. And
yeah, it paved the way.
They're still making them. Actually,
I
I think the other day they just announced, Toho just announced they're going to release a new Godzilla film, the first one since Shin Godzilla from, I think, 2014. So that's pretty rad.
And now you have the, contemporary MonsterVerse.
Yes.
Which is the, newer versions of King Kong and Godzilla and then the crossover between the two.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's 15 total films in the MonsterVerse.
Oh man. That's awesome. So we've got what we think are the original franchise. Again, horror paving the way for everybody, making the money, and finally getting the respect it deserves, making them billions. But let's start talking about. I have a whole section of there's what I mentioned earlier, the double-edged sword of a franchise.
Yeah, the video killed the radio star concept.
Exactly, yeah.
How franchises are killing independent cinema.
It definitely crowds out the ecosystem.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at all of the tops.
So you can really see this happening, I think, in the 80s. when you've got these incredible creators like John Carpenter, the 70s and 80s, John Carpenter, Wes Craven, making properties, Tobe Hooper, and then they get sequelized to death. I mean, and not all of them are bad. Some of the sequels are legit really great. I mean, especially Friday the 13th, Jason doesn't even appear until, proper Jason, adult grown-up Jason, doesn't even appear until the second one. But it's almost universal that there does come a point where you hit a period of diminishing returns.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really interesting to watch a franchise from start to finish, especially one that has spanned decades. Because I recently did this. I think I did this like a year ago. I watched from start to finish every single Friday the 13th movie. And I've seen them all before, but I've seen them all, over the years. Over a period of a few weeks, I watched all of them start to finish, including the remake, which is one of the better entries, honestly, the 2009 version with Jared Padalecki. But what was so interesting was by watching the themes of each installment as they go through the 80s, you can really track the social developments of the time. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is the first few Friday the 13th movies take place in the early 80s. And it's much more like partying, and there's a lot more violence.
Sure.
The violence is more graphic. And the police are depicted as not the heroes. They're not really depicted as great. By the time you hit the mid-'80s and the middle entries of the series, those were deep into the Reagan years and the rah-rah Rambo patriotism of the 80s. The violence and the body count is still there, but the graphic nature of the movies really gets toned down. They're nowhere near as bloody. Also, the cops are straight up the heroes of the movies.
Right.
And you start to notice that the people getting killed in the movies are what you might call, at the time, if you're a piece of shit, you would call social undesirables. So, there comes a point where Jason basically becomes the protagonist of these movies, and he's killing, drifters and alcoholics and drug addicts and, honestly, minorities.
So that he's an appealing character.
Yes, but it starts to really reflect how conservative America socially became in that era. This is also the time of satanic panic and moral panic and all of that. So, watching it start to finish was a really interesting social experiment. And then as you loop around into the 2000s, the gore and the extreme comes back.
Right.
And honestly, I'm excited because Friday the 13th has been involved in some legal tangles for years and years.
Yeah.
You haven't seen a new movie since 2009. Those seem to have finally been resolved. So it looks like we're going to be getting some new installments. They just announced a prequel TV series that's, I think, going to be about Pamela Voorhees. Normally, wouldn't be interested in something like that, but it's being done by Brian Fuller, who did Hannibal, who did Pushing Daisies.
Oh, nice.
Who did the first season of Heroes, which was the only good one. So, yeah, that has me intrigued for sure.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we can talk about the pros and cons of franchises.
Breakity break. I'm sorry I said that.
So why don't we take a break, and when we come back, we can talk about the pros and cons of franchises and then get into our favorites.
Sounds like a great idea.
Are you tired of being told to calm down? Annoyed at no one believing you when you say you see someone outside or in the house or following you home? Finally, a solution for you to prove once and for all you got this. Introducing Final Girl CBD Seltzer. FG CBD Seltzer combines everything you love about that sparkly, bubbly treat with the calming and focused effect of cannabidiol. With just one 12-ounce can of FG CBD, you can make it through every bump in the night, hysterical frenemy outburst, inappropriate or unwanted romantic overtures, and jump scare after jump scare after jump scare. Try our enticing flavors like Redemption Raspberry, Exhausted by Elderberry, Extra Virgin Mary, and Mellow Melon Maniac. With each sip, feel all of the nonsense coming from those around you melt away while you figure out how to get yourself out of this fucking nightmare. This is a fake ad for a fake product on a horror-themed podcast. We do not make this amazing sounding seltzer for any reason, but if we did, this would be a great niche market. But we don't, and most likely won't. And we're back.
Oh, so back.
So,
God. If size could kill. Goodness.
So I just wanted to get your thoughts on some of the pros and cons. I can start with some cons.
Do it.
A lot of times when franchises start to really increase in number, it's hard to remember or understand the individuality of each installment.
Oh, definitely. They do.
They bleed into each other. And so then the
do.
creativity of the story becomes really diluted.
Yeah. When you start to, like, was it 4 or 5 when Freddy did this thing? Yeah. You're right.
Or there's certain...
And that's a shame because movies are hard to make.
There's certain information in one of the installments, and maybe it's not the best one, but in order to understand what happens in the later ones, it's kind of critical that you have watched that installment in order to collect that information.
Yeah. I mean,
you got to be in the know. You can't really just go into the MCU and be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to jump in with...
That has always been my issue. Is I am such a continuity nerd and a completionist that I'll straight up sit through the shit installments of franchise just because I feel weird if I don't finish it out.
Well, there are people who just want all the Easter eggs too.
Yeah, and I'm one of those. I like that stuff.
One of the other cons I wanted to talk about is just the basic takeover of smaller, really well done movies.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame. Ridley Scott has bitched about this a lot, and he's not wrong. Quentin Tarantino has talked about it, that when these movies that are making billions of dollars, that's all anyone wants to make now.
Right.
And it means that adult, mature, standalone films, dramas, they don't get made. They don't get funded.
And they don't stay in theaters as long because they're not grossing movies. And I also think, and I'm not in Hollywood, in the business conversations in Hollywood, but I would argue that...
I mean, we could easily go to our mansion in Los Feliz if we wanted to and be in Hollywood. But
I would argue that funding and greenlight is going to happen faster and more often if you have a franchise or are part of a franchise.
100%.
As opposed to if you want to make a film like The Lost Daughter or Nomadland. Those films, although have star caliber and amazing directors and great stories, they're out there. But I think that the funding is harder to come by. They don't make as much in the theater because they get released when the new Spider-Man comes out, because there's always a franchise movie that's released at the same time as a smaller film.
I think...
So what has happened to the smaller films out there?
But not just the smaller films, because, I mean, I think you can tell something is
or
not
a non-franchise
right.
film.
I think you can really tell there's something wrong when you've got people like Ridley Scott and Steven Spielberg saying they have trouble finding funding for their films. Right. Are you fucking kidding me? How many billions of dollars do you need to make for this town to get a blank check? Just give Steven Spielberg money. Yeah, not every movie he makes is great, but he's defined modern movie making. He invented the blockbuster.
Yeah.
My God, give him money. Ridley Scott should not have to argue and scrounge. It's insane. I'm a really not. I'm not a big fan of what the recent developments at Warner Brothers and their current direction. And, you know, the new CEO said something along the lines of, why are we giving all this money to people like Clint Eastwood? His movies don't make enough money. It's like, it's Clint Eastwood. Isn't there something to be said for making quality films, for making, I don't know, something
not
different?
Anymore because
I know,
of the gross
I'm an old man shaking his
product
fist at the sky right now.
of the money that you can make with a franchise or a superhero movie or a big budget blockbuster or like a summer movie, even Maverick, you know?
Yeah, which was dope.
Yeah, it was amazing. So, and we're going to see these movies.
That's true. That's
the
true.
consumer is also part of this wheel.
Yeah.
But I will say the positive of franchises is the like what you can rely on. You know, the film quality. You know that it's going to be sometimes like great special effects, great cast. You know, you know what to expect going into a franchise.
I guess you're right. It's kind of like
It's
going
sort
to
of
your
like a
favorite
comfort.
diner.
Yeah, right. You go and
like
get
maybe
the same
it's
thing.
It's not the best meal you've ever had, but you know it's going to be fine.
Yeah, you always get, you know,
I feel that way about the MCU.
you're never disappointed.
The MCU for me is like,
I know.
It's either fine and entertaining or it's great. There's really nothing about it that I find like awful.
Right. Yeah.
But you know, it very rarely, with some rare exceptions, like Black Panther was one of like, it rarely rises to the level of like, oh my God.
Yeah. Shang-Chi.
Yeah, Shang-Chi was another. Yeah. Oh, just seeing Tony Leung in a $1 billion, you know, MCU movie was the coolest thing ever. And again, that guy has not aged in like 30 years.
Right.
It's amazing.
So do you want to talk a little bit, get into like specific movie franchises?
I do. I actually have this section of franchises that started well and then went awry.
Okay. Well, I want to just tell the listener about some horror movie franchises, just break down some of them.
Get
and
ready,
how many
listener.
films they have. So
It's coming.
Halloween has 13.
Holy shit.
Friday the 13th has 12.
Mm-hmm.
Saw has 9.
Oh, God.
The Hannibal Lecter universe, which is considered a franchise, has 5.
The Lecterverse.
The Conjuring has 8. Alien also has 8. Paranormal Activity has 6.
Yeah.
The Purge has 5. And Predator has 6.
Wow.
And the highest grossing horror franchises are, in order, The Conjuring with $2.12 billion.
James Wan.
Alien with $1.72 billion.
That's Ridley Scott.
And Resident Evil with $1.23 billion.
And that is just unfortunate. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be. Those movies aren't good, though.
Don't yuck everyone's yum.
They stink.
So what are some of your...
Yes.
Whatever.
My franchises that started off well and went awry. Most of them. But specifically, Halloween, great first entry. Okay second entry. I would argue amazing third entry, but, you know,
Are you
tangential.
going to go through every single...
But then it really
13?
you start to hit that point of diminishing returns. Nightmare on Elm Street, almost right away, the second movie is real.
But then we go well. We get better.
Well, that's the thing. The third movie is great. Then the fourth and fifth are kind of not so good. 6 is terrible. And then 7 is great. I would say the worst franchise offender, in my opinion, is Hellraiser. Hellraiser 1 was amazing, directed by Clive Barker himself. Hellraiser 2, also amazing. Great sequel. Then I'll never forget the experience of watching Hellraiser 3 Hell on Earth for the first time and going, what the fuck is this? It's such a dramatic drop in quality. And then you've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It got to the point where the Weinsteins, in order to keep the rights from reverting back to Clive Barker.
We do not endorse the Weinsteins.
No. They pumped out a shitty, like, made-for-DVD sequel that took like only a few weeks to film. They recast Pinhead just to keep the rights away from Clive Barker. Like, that's when the business side of things gets really disgusting. Then, of course, comes roaring back in 2022 with an amazing installment by David Bruckner, and Clive Barker is developing a television series. So, redemption.
Yes.
I would say also for the Predator franchise, redemption in the form of Prey.
That was
Amazing.
incredible.
So, that is to say, franchises, of course, the more installments you throw into them, it really just depends on the care you're putting into it. You don't discount a franchise, and there is always that wonderful phenomenon of sometimes they really come roaring back. Then there's the unfortunate phenomenon of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the most recent installment being a real disappointment. No, it was a bummer.
So I thought that we could talk. I have, 3 of my favorite franchises. Yes. And listen, they're not all great individually, but I enjoyed the central theme, the story, the cast or the folks that are in it. And, I think if you latch on to something with the first or second movie in a franchise, that you can endure some of the lesser enjoyable, parts of the franchise.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes they do get better.
And sometimes the weaker installments, they still have their place.
Yeah. And my first example is a perfect example of how there are some not great individual movies, but on a whole, I find it quite enjoyable, which is Final Destination.
Oh, wow. Yes.
I mean, listen.
It's been around for a long time.
They're fun.
They are.
They're ridiculous.
The like Rube Goldberg nature of the deaths. Yeah.
If for those of you that aren't familiar, Final Destination franchise, essentially main character foresees the deaths of a group of individuals that are in a movie.
In like a hellacious accident of some sort.
Like something that could never happen.
Like very dramatic,
or
complex.
that no one could ever foresee happening. And they always wake up because they had like fallen asleep or like dreamed this. And then they get into a panic and they leave the situation. So they evade the death the best they can.
Yeah.
And
they bring a few people with them.
Well, sometimes they try, and some people believe them. Some people, for the example, in the first movie, they were on a flight.
It was Devon
school.
Sawa.
Yeah. They were on a school trip to Paris, which, like, what school goes to Paris on a school trip in high school? But they had to have both teachers come
Texas,
off the
maybe.
plane to deal with them because they're minors.
Yeah.
And so one of the teachers is like, no, you go. No, you go. And so one of them goes back on the plane and one stays back. So it's not like a choice.
Yeah.
They have to do that because they're the teacher.
And then what happens to that plane?
Oh, yeah. It blows up.
It explodes. It explodes good.
The dream or prescient vision
prognostication
comes to fruition, then death ends up following these characters because they were supposed to die and they didn't, so they have to die. So
death
all of these
like
other ways, sometimes it's similar to how it would have happened. If like you get a shard of glass in your eye in the original vision, then you'll get a shard of glass in your eye somehow.
Listen, you're getting that shard of glass in your eye one way or another.
So the first Final Destination was new. It was different.
I saw it in the theater.
It was fun.
Yeah. They're like, they're like the same age as me, so it was like really fun. Yeah.
And the second one was solid, not great, but it was a solid entry, starring AJ Cook from Criminal Minds.
Yeah.
It was a solid entry. If you remember at all, and I know you've seen this in other movie, maybe Fast and Furious or something, where there's a truck with lumber.
on
Lumber
it.
I
think
it.
Like
and
Bad Boys 2 maybe had something like that.
And it goes through the windshield and kills somebody. So that definitely happened in the second one.
Honestly, whenever I don't like following lumber trucks on the highway
I know,
because of
right,
movies.
exactly.
Like, I always change lanes. I'm like, nope.
And so there are a total of 5 Final Destination films. Like I said, the first is good. The second is solid. The third and fourth are not great.
I believe the fourth. How far did you make it into the fourth before declaring?
I don't know. It was.
I'm guessing like minutes.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was unwatchable.
Yeah, it literally
and that
was.
happens.
Yeah,
that happens sometimes. I must admit, I turned it off after about 10 minutes.
Yeah. Got stuff to do.
Lots of weird stereotypes and like racism, and
that
sexism,
sort of mid 2000s, like
yeah, and it was like all meant to expose, but it was really
clumsy.
not
yeah.
And it was also gratuitous in a way that
if you're going to tackle
I didn't think it was necessary.
Things like that, you have to be a bit more nuanced.
But with the final installation of Final Destination installment number 5, it comes back around. It comes back around to,
many would argue the best version, and best installment.
It's designed, interestingly, it's designed to be a prequel to the first in the series. So it takes place I don't know, like a week or two before the first does. Different characters.
Got a cool ending.
Very cool ending.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
Yeah.
I would say if you're going to invest in Final Destination, watch 1, 2, and 5.
And for fans of The Office, 5 stars Hunter.
Yeah.
From The Office. You took me by the hand. Oh, man. Made me a man. I'm going to start with the rare franchise that I would argue has no weak entries at all.
Wow.
Yep. And that is The Evil Dead. Now, The Evil Dead has 3 main films, 1 reboot, an upcoming second reboot, and 3 seasons of TV, and many, many comic books.
And a musical.
And a musical. I forgot about that, and we've seen it.
It's amazing.
It's great.
It's really
fun. They spray you with fake blood. It's awesome. It's so fun and dumb and fun and awesome. I love it. Oh, wow. I can't believe, how did I forget that? So, created famously by Sam Raimi, The Evil Dead, the first one, 1981, is a straight-up horror movie. It's a low-budget masterpiece of a horror movie. It's real scrappy, independent guerrilla filmmaking by a bunch of talented, passionate, young weirdos. Bruce Campbell is the iconic Ash Williams fighting the Deadites.
I would consider these horror comedies, dark comedies.
That's the thing. The first one, not so much. The second one is absolutely makes a hard pivot into horror comedy.
Well, I think they leaned into the audience reception of the first one.
And Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi,
which was campy and fun.
Yeah, they're like big Three Stooges fans. They're big, physical comedy fans. So Evil Dead 2: Dead by Dawn is where the series makes a real pivot into comedy. Then comes Army of Darkness, which was the first one that I saw because that came out in 1993. And I was like, this movie's amazing. I was so happy to find out that there were other movies in this franchise. But Army of Darkness had the biggest budget. It was theatrically released. It had the biggest promotion. It didn't do well at the box office. Mm-hmm. And I remember in the early days of the internet, Bruce Campbell had his own website, his own fan site. And he looped an audio recording on it that was so heartbreaking. And it was just Bruce Campbell saying, "I'm sorry, there will be no Evil Dead 4." Because he was tired of people asking him about it.
Yeah.
Well.
Lies.
Yes. Because in 2013, Fede Alvarez did the impossible. He made an Evil Dead remake that ruled.
Wow.
It was so good. He gender swapped the protagonist. It was played by Jane Levy, who did an amazing job. She was in Twin Peaks, Castle Rock. Mm-hmm. She's going to be in the upcoming Toxic Avenger reboot with Peter Dinklage, which I'm really looking forward to. I think it set a record for most blood ever used in a single scene.
Wow.
Which I think was previously held by Peter Jackson's Dead Alive, also known as Brain Dead. Anyone who's seen that, the lawnmower scene, you know what I'm talking about. It's another horror comedy. But then in 2015 comes what essentially is Evil Dead 4, 3 seasons of an amazing, gory, hilarious R-rated TV show, Ash vs. Evil Dead. It is so worth it. It's so good. Bruce Campbell picks up as like, you know, late 50s Ash. He's paunchy. He's a loser. You know, he lives in a trailer. He still works at S-Mart, you know. Hey, folks, shop smart, shop S-Mart. He still works in housewares. He's still doing the same shit. He still drives the same car. But it's so awesome. Lucy Lawless is in it. Samara Weaving pops up for a few episodes.
Oh, she's great.
It's so worth it. It continues, expands the mythos. It's so gory and so funny and just so perfect. A really great capstone. And a special shout out to the comic books by Dynamite Entertainment, because when the movies weren't getting made, the comics were keeping the story alive. And they were great. They often saw Ash facing other iconic horror villains like Pinhead or Jason. You know, it was like Ash versus so-and-so.
Yeah.
And the comics really let creators just go nuts with the characters. But the reason Ash vs. Evil Dead and the remakes came about is the comic books kept the interest in the franchise alive. So just Evil Dead, it's not for everybody. I understand that. It's very gory. It's sort of goofy. But in my opinion, it's one of the rare franchises out there that is solid from start to finish. Even the comics, there's really no weak link.
Awesome. Well, the next I'm going to talk about, it definitely has weak links. It's Insidious franchise.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a couple of notes. One is you can watch it in order that the movies were released, or you could watch it in chronological order of the actual storytelling.
There's a prequel in there.
Yes. Yeah. So if you want to watch this in chronological order, you start with Insidious Chapter 3, which came out in 2015.
Yes.
Followed by the fourth, which is the last installment, Insidious: The Last Key.
Yes.
2018. Then you watch the first installment, Insidious. Then you watch the second, Insidious Chapter 2.
And the prequels really explore Lynn Shaye's, now I would say, iconic character in those movies. She was a real standout.
Yes. So let me just tell you a little bit about like what the first film was like. And I don't know if this was always intended to be a franchise or not, but I can say that when the production budget was 1.5 million and it grossed 97 million.
It's another James Wan Lee Wannell collaboration.
So that is what probably spawned the franchise.
Those two guys created Saw, The Conjuring, and Insidious. Wow.
So Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne star in Insidious as a couple.
They're so good.
Who are looking for some therapy for their son, more like parapsychology, because he goes into a coma after they move into their new home.
Yes.
And they're the Lamberts, and they hire an investigator, Elise Rayner, played by Lynn Shane. Who's amazing. Lynn Shay, who discovers that an evil spirit is what's haunting them. And honestly, I thought it was really scary.
It's awesome.
Super suspenseful. Lots of good scares.
Do you want to?
It's a solid horror movie.
Do you want to mention the further? That's the place they. Oh, I'm sorry. No spoilers.
I mean, it does explain. It touches on it in the first film.
Yeah.
But it really doesn't. You don't really understand it until the later films.
It's classic James Wan, where he's world building. This guy can't help himself. Like, he's always world building. One movie is not enough for him.
The second movie was still, I think, a solid entry.
Agreed.
It's chronologically the fourth, so the last one.
Yeah.
But it gives you more information about what happened to Josh.
Yeah.
Josh. So it sort of gives you that narrative, gives you that insight, talks about the further, and it keeps you like wanting more. You want more of this universe.
And there's the don't forget that iconic demon.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Very scary.
Yeah.
That like really scary dark demon.
That Darth Maul looking motherfucker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the third film, where I think it starts to falter.
A little. It stumbles.
Stars Dermot Mulroney.
From Young Guns?
Yeah, from a lot of things.
Yeah, no, I love him. He's always great.
And Lin Shaye comes back. It's a prequel to the first two and the third in the franchise overall.
And there's a reason for that. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, so it starts with Quinn Brenner, a teenager who believes her mother is attempting to contact her from the beyond. And so she wants to communicate with her, so she calls...
even from the beyond.
She calls a paranormal investigator.
As you do.
And she goes into the further.
Get the old
and
phone
she's
book.
attacked by an evil entity wearing an oxygen mask. And she notices an evil demon comes back.
Yeah.
So I think it's really great. We meet Elise for the first time. But I didn't love it. And then the last I did not like.
I don't think audiences did either. It didn't do that great.
It goes further into Elise's life as a paranormal investigator. And again, it's like the second in chronological. So maybe if you watch it in chronological order, which I haven't attempted.
Oh, maybe it's a different experience.
Maybe it's a more rewarding experience because the first is actually the last in chronological.
It's like watching Star Wars in chronological order. It's a little bit different.
Yep. And this one's directed by Adam Robitel.
Well, interestingly enough, there is an upcoming installment of Insidious in development, and it's going to be the directorial debut of Patrick Wilson, and his character and Rose Byrne's character are returning.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it seems like...
I would like that.
That is potential to return to form because, man, listen, Patrick Wilson is so solid.
Yeah.
He is an actor that no matter what the rest of the movie is, you know he's going to be good in it. It's just, that's a given. It's like a universal constant. So I'm interested to see if he can bring that level as a director.
Yeah, I mean, if you like the character of Elise, then, you'll definitely like the fourth one because it really digs deep into that. But maybe try watching it in the chronological order. So 3, 4, 1, and 2.
Like Insidious, there aren't any installments that are like
terrible.
Shit.
No, but they're
just not as good.
Ones.
Yeah, for sure.
But
that's awesome.
Feel free to check it out. I like it. I'll watch it again. And maybe I'll do it in chronological order. If you do it, listener, I'll do it too.
Nice. You look up at the sky and say, I'm watching the same movie as you under the same moon.
What's your next one?
My next one's a juggernaut. It is Alien.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So Alien got 4 main films, 2 spin-offs, 2 prequels, and an upcoming TV show on Hulu being created by Noah Hawley of Fargo. Yeah, we love Noah Hawley.
I just
Legion.
finished a book of his.
Yeah. So, Alien. Now, the first movie is my personal favorite of the series. It's a claustrophobic, straight-up horror movie. It's terrifying. It is a wonderful exploration of class struggle in a futuristic setting. Amazing cast of characters. Amazing direction. The second movie, Aliens, is also an absolute goddamn classic, and it is basically the antithesis of the first movie. Where the first movie was contained and claustrophobic, the second movie is bombastic and an action sci-fi. It's amazing. It goes in a completely different direction. Another classic.
I definitely love the first one.
I love them both. That is, of course, directed by James Cameron. Now, Alien 3, a bit controversial, went through a lot of studio meddling. The end result is a bit of a mixed bag, but it's a return to the claustrophobic horror elements, and it is also famously the directorial debut of David Fincher.
I like me some David Fincher. I
like Alien 3. It's flawed. It takes maybe a direction that I wouldn't... for a David Fincher fan, it's an interesting movie to watch, and it does have its moments. It's very tense, and it's quite graphic. Alien Resurrection was the next one to come out, and I'm going to call that the baffling entry. It is directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who is a favorite of mine. Did Delicatessen, City of Lost Children, Amelie, Very Long Engagement. But it is weird, interesting, different. Then you go off into the spin-offs, Alien vs. Predator, Alien vs. Predator Requiem. Ridley Scott comes back for the prequel Prometheus and Alien Covenant. And, listen, the prequels are visually stunning and they're interesting, but they are heavily flawed in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's quite a juggernaut of a franchise. It's one that I would argue is definitely is a mixed bag. There are no entries aside from Alien versus Predator and the other one. Those aren't very good, but the other films are all worth watching. Now, Alien and Aliens are straight up all-time classics. And I'm really, really looking forward to the upcoming TV show because Noah Hawley's involvement, for one, is an automatic interest for me. But it's the first Alien property to be set on Earth. It's a prequel to the original movie. It doesn't involve Ripley or anything like that. And it's, in Noah Hawley's words, he's saying it's a real return to that blue-collar class struggle feel of the first movie, where you had like Yaphet Kotto and Harry Dean Stanton's character as like the put upon like contracted workers,
right?
And it's being used by the company as chattel for this alien that they were hoping to turn into a bioweapon. Anyway, Alien, it's a massive franchise. Pop in there. Honestly, it's narratively sort of connected, but you can pop in and out into the movies. It's not like they follow them directly, and you can follow along without getting lost. Continuity is not super important.
Yeah, awesome. So my last is Scream.
Ooh, yeah. It's another complicated
Wes Craven,
one.
which we've talked in depth about Wes Craven. And written by Kevin Williamson. And for most of the series, David Arquette, Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, all-star. The first Scream is great. I think it really laid the groundwork for a different type of meta horror.
It's a genre-defining
definitely horror
movie.
Comedy, but also final girl emergence of a unlikely heroine becoming sort of this thread that is woven throughout all 5 Scream films.
It not only introduced the iconic Ghostface as one of like the new villains, but it also introduced the iconic Sidney Prescott as one of the best final girls of all time.
Absolutely. And she is a final girl in most of the films.
She has it rough, man.
She
That's
does.
a tough life.
Sadly, she won't be coming back for the 6th installment, which I think is a real shame.
Yeah.
But maybe it's time
Neve
for her
Campbell
to move
money.
on. I know. Maybe it's time for her to move on, and I think that's okay.
Listen, it's being directed by the same group that did Scream 5, so I'm sure it's going to be good. Jenna Ortega's coming back.
Yep, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So what I just want to say is not all solid entries. Scream, the original Scream, solid. The second installment, Sydney Goes to College, it's okay.
Is that the one with Timothy Oliphant?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is.
And then the third one has Scott Speedman.
Correct.
Yeah. I rate them by beefcakes.
Oh. So the third one, I would say it starts out really great. Patrick Dempsey's also in it.
Oh, right.
Another beefcake.
Yeah.
But it doesn't hold as much excitement. Scream 4.
You're kinder to Scream 3 than I am.
Yeah, well, I also refer to Scream 3 as unwatchable.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, although I do think there are important bits of information.
Exactly.
If you're going to watch...
If you're a completionist, definitely watch it.
Sure, but if
it
you're
is
going to watch... If you're like, I want to watch the cream of the crop of the Scream franchise.
The cream of the jeans.
Then I would say that 1 and 2 and 4 and 5. I think you can skip 3 and still be fine.
4 really
4 is on par with 2, I would say. It's not as good as the first one,
but it's really good.
But it is watchable.
Hayden
and
Panettiere's
some things
character.
happen, and some things happen that I think are a little bit of a nod to the 5th, which these elements and these Easter eggs are important because, you know, when I gasp at a movie because I'm like, oh, wow, oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
And I'm trying not to spoil because these are, you know, I mean, Scream 4 came out in 2011, but Scream 5 came out in 2022. So I don't want to spoil that one because it is good. And I'm going to argue that it is the best Scream entry.
I am in full agreement with you. I think 4 was excellent, and I thought 5 was the best one yet,
but you
including
can't
the
have
first.
5 without 1.
Of course, absolutely.
And so I think that 1 holds its merits, and it definitely was a, you know, something I'd never seen. It's got that like sort of teen, you know, drama that Kevin Williamson does so well, with Dawson's Creek and some other teen focused dramas that he's written. But Scream 5, it was really scary.
Very scary. Directed by
relentless, too.
The duo that did Ready or Not.
Yes, it
Radio
was relentless,
Silence.
which I thought was really great.
Yeah.
Matt Bettinell.
I think collectively they're just known as Radio Silence.
Oh, okay.
They have
right. So it takes place 25 years after the original. So it's happening 20. You know, like I like that it's sort of contemporary and it's traced these characters. Some of them, I think it's great, and I think that I'm very excited for the 6th. So I would highly recommend Scream franchise. It's fun. It's scary at times.
Scream 5 for me felt like
a real horror movie.
Well, it felt like the result of people of our generation watching their franchises kind of get run into the ground and getting frustrated with it, and then coming in to sort of resurrect.
Yeah.
You're seeing that happen with a lot of different things, with, you know, younger filmmakers coming in to sort of resurrect these franchises that through greed were creatively just had the juice squeezed out of them.
Yeah. And it stars Mickey Madison. She was part of the Manson family in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and also in the TV series Better Things, which I just want to give a shout out. Pamela Adlon created this series, and it ran for, I think, 5 seasons, about her 3 daughters and her mom in Hollywood, and it was incredible.
Oh, Pamela Adlon's
It was
amazing.
Heartfelt, well written, well acted, and Mickey Madison was the eldest daughter, and she's in Scream 5, and her character is amazing.
Yeah.
And I think that Scream 5 has everything you want, especially if you have been part of the Scream franchise since the start.
I'm going to have an old man moment. It is a gas to now be watching the kids of the movie stars that were famous when I was a kid. So, like, Jack Quaid is in Scream 5.
Yeah.
It's Dennis Quaid's son.
Yeah.
And he's amazing. Jack Quaid's great in everything. He's in The Boys. He's in Star Trek Lower Decks. He's great. But
they also have kids of some of the characters from the first Scream movie.
Yeah.
Fictionalized in Scream 5.
Gosh. We're getting old. Oh, no. What's happening? Can I do my last one?
Yeah, that's what happens after
I love this franchise so much, and I'm going to level with you. Not everybody does, and I understand why. It's Phantasm. I love Phantasm so much. Now, Phantasm, it consists of 5 films, 4 of which were directed by Don Coscarelli, the last of which David Hartman took over. And Don Coscarelli created this strange, surreal, weird movie with Phantasm. It doesn't always make sense. It's often very dreamlike, but there's just something about it There's a world building. There's a purposeful ambiguity that sort of just keeps you coming back to it. Don Coscarelli very purposefully does not spell everything out for you in these movies. He leaves a lot up to interpretation, and that's a very refreshingly old-fashioned storytelling way of storytelling, because I feel like nowadays the impetus is to explain everything. Like, I need to know Darth Vader's childhood,
right,
and what makes everything tick. Phantasm is the opposite of that. It lays out the breadcrumbs. You can follow along, but there's a lot, even by the end of the fifth movie, that is left to interpretation. So, a couple of things. Just the broad strokes. It stars A. Michael Baldwin. The first one is a young kid who witnesses something strange happening in his town at the Morningside.
In his neighborhood?
Yeah, who are you going to call, right?
Phantasm.
So there's the Morningside Cemetery and Funeral Home is run by the Tall Man, played by Angus Scrimm. The Tall Man, it's all he's ever known by. He's doing something to the bodies, and gosh, it's hard to explain, honestly. So basically, the main character, he's having dreams. There's a psychic. The Tall Man is turning the bodies into these, it's crushing the bodies down into dwarf-sized, like, minions.
Oh, boy.
And he's using the brains. It turns them into spheres with knives in them that suck out your brain blood. It's crazy. A lot going on in this movie. So the Tall Man, played by Angus Scrimm, is just so iconic. He's moves very slowly, and Angus Scrimm had he had this like stony visage and a real look, and you could tell he was just so into it. I'm going to talk about him a little bit more in a second, but Reggie Bannister plays Reggie Bannister. I don't know why they didn't change his name for the movie, but
maybe they liked it so much that it didn't.
I guess Reggie Bannister is the all-time best friend. He is the ultimate best friend.
The Samwise?
Yes. Oh, what a great comparison. He's the Samwise Gamgee of Phantasm. Reggie starts off in the first movie as like a happy-go-lucky ice cream truck guy who plays guitar, and he just wants to score with the ladies. He ends up fighting interdimensional demons, going to hell and back for his friends. He loses everything. He gives up his whole life to spend decades traveling the country in search of his friends and fighting this evil. Reggie never asks why. He never questions. He barely ever even complains. He goes right into the mouth of hell for his friends. I love
really
Reggie.
Is the Samwise.
Reggie is the best. You can't help but fall in love with Reggie. And he's the everyman. He's not great at this. He's just doing his best.
Yeah. He's
kind of a fuck up. He's trying, but Reggie will go into the flames for you. Everyone needs a friend like Reggie. So Phantasm it's a strange experience. It's a real triumph in determination. You know, Don Coscarelli, the first one was a bit of a cult classic. He ended up making a sequel in the 80s, but the studio kind of took a lot of it away from him, and they made him recast A. Michael Baldwin. James LaGrosse played the character. And nothing against James LaGrosse, but it was weird, recasting that. They were just hoping that a big name actor like James LaGrosse would bring in more money because, household name James LaGrosse. Sorry, James. But then in the third movie, Don Coscarelli got the sort of rights back, and he brought A. Michael Baldwin back in to play the main character. The fourth movie explores the Tall Man's story a little bit more in his backstory. The fifth one is like in the future. It's a wild ride. I want to talk just for a moment about Angus Scrimm.
How many are there total? 5?
5. Now, Angus Scrimm was born Lawrence Rory Guy in 1926. He started out trying his hand at acting, but he was a 6'4", very interesting looking guy, had very severe features. And his first role was in an educational film as Abraham Lincoln, because he kind of looks like Abraham Lincoln. But he couldn't really get work as an actor, so he was an entertainment journalist for a while, and then he got a job writing liner notes, and actually won a Grammy in the 70s for writing liner notes.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know you got Grammys for that.
I didn't either. So he Phantasm was his real break into movies, back into an acting, and that's when he changed his name to Angus Scrim, and he really leaned into this horror icon characterization. He starred in a few other horror movies. I Sell the Dead in 2008 is actually a pretty decent movie with I think Dominic Monaghan was in it. And he was
Lost?
in Subspecies. Yeah, from Lost and
from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. He was a delightful guy, went to a lot of conventions. He was very spirited and entertaining and like an old-fashioned entertainer.
Yeah.
And then you see him in these movies and he's really chewing the scenery, and he had that famous boy that he would do in the movies. I loved Angus Scrim. He sadly passed in 2016. But he was like,
sounds like he lived a long life.
He had an incredible life, an interesting life, and a man who changed careers several times and found his greatest success later on in life. I mean, he was in his late 50s when he starred in Phantasm. Now, he was only 6'4", so as the tall man, he's actually wearing pretty hefty lifts. Wow. To make him look really, really tall. And there are some scenes where you can see him wearing these big ass platforms. But I understand Phantasm won't be for everybody, but another big fan of it is J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams loves the original Phantasm especially. Bad Robot oversaw the 4K restoration of the film. And if you've seen the prequel Star Wars movies, Captain Phasma, played by Gwendolyn Christie, was named after Phantasm.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, his little tribute.
That's nice.
And that's why her armor is also so shiny, because it's like the brain balls.
Yeah.
The shiny balls.
Awesome.
Phantasm. Yeah, get your balls.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode about franchises.
Like, it's open for interpretation. It's kind of complicated, and there are good...
It's hard to avoid now.
It's good and it is. It's good and bad, like anything else. But I think filmmaking...
We are where we are.
The filmmaking industry is cyclical, and I think this current era of nonstop superhero franchises will eventually wind down into something else, and I'm excited to see what that is.
Might as well grab and hold of some of the best parts of franchises and enjoy it.
Absolutely.
See you next time.
Have a great week, everyone.
Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Suspanic. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're sad.